Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. This episode is going to be a short one. It's going to feel like we're covering over old ground in the sense that we're going to be talking about photographers again, but there's a difference between the sort of family photographer and the Christmas photographer, Judith Phillips, and these other photographers, guys like Randy Simons and Mark Fix. So the kind of most famous photos of JonBenet are from these two photographers, whereas a lot of the other photos that are sort of more kind of homely and sort of wholesome are from Judith Phillips and sort of kind of family photographers, the Denver Photography Studio, I believe. So in this episode we're going to go over the photographers that took the kind of iconic photos of JonBenet. And arguably, if these photographers weren't part of the package, if you want to put it that way, then I'm not sure whether the JonBenet Ramsey case would have become as huge as it did. A big reason why the JonBenet Ramsey case became what it became was because of this fairy tale aspect that she was sort of this American princess, right? And it was the photography that captured that. And so more than just the sort of cowboy photos or whatever, the ones where she's dressed like a princess and made up like a princess in a way, that created this incredible tragedy, this incredible nightmare in the mind of the public, where you have a fairy tale gone horribly wrong. It's not only an incredible fairy tale on the one side. In other words, the fairy tale is very dressed up, very happy, and it's this elaborate fairy tale. It's a big house in this fairy tale setting of Colorado, Boulder. It's Christmas, all those things, and then this nightmare right beside it. Dead in a basement, and all the things that went into it as well. And then on top of all of that, this sort of inconclusive investigation that despite all of that happening, there's this sort of perception that we don't know why, we don't know how, we don't know when, we don't know what actually happened. And that is what makes it kind of a horror story, doesn't it? Before we get started on this episode, if you haven't subscribed yet, please do. Like, share, leave a comment, and let's get started. So we are starting on page 258 of Perfect Murder, Perfect Town. And this is Randy Simons' version of how he experienced the photo shoot with JonBenet. Now, a couple of things that he says that's quite interesting is that he challenges the notion that JonBenet wasn't enjoying being a sort of pageant princess, right? A mini pageant queen kind of thing. He was saying that, it wasn't long before the tabloids were sort of saying that Patsy forced JonBenet into, I guess, to some extent the pageant thing, but also what he calls excruciating shots. And Randy Simon says he never saw anything like that. That as far as he was concerned, JonBenet enjoyed what she was doing. She enjoyed dressing up. She enjoyed the attention, all that kind of thing. And you can kind of understand why the photographer would give his clients kind of a glowing endorsement. He's being paid. He's being paid to do what he's doing, and he, I won't say there's like a client photographer privilege kind of thing going on, but there's a little bit of a thing like that because you don't want to turn away other prospective clients, and also you want to it's sort of like you want to be a bit discreet about things that aren't necessarily positive. So he was paid $590 for the day's work. He worked for the entire day I think, not quite sure what day it was, he doesn't really say, but it was those cowboy hat photos, then shots with flowers in her hair against a green background. And those photos, so it was actually Randy Simons' photos that kind of went on to become iconic. And as he says, they adorned covers all over the world. And these are kind of the default photos. When you think of JonBenet, you think of those particular photos. But on that same day, he took a lot of other photos. He says, that it was supposed to be a half-day shoot. And just before noon, Patsy went out to get pizza for everybody. And then they went back onto location. He photographed her in a dance outfit with polka dots. That's where she's sort of wearing a sort of black and white outfit with a wide-brimmed hat. And then a harlequin dance costume. And JonBenet, although she was working the whole day, only got tired of wearing certain outfits. She wasn't tired of what they were doing. She would be like, well, let's try something else. And Randy says that she never complained about the heat or the bright sun. And they were at a residential subdivision of Ken Carroll Ranch, where they did the Little House on the Prairie dress and some playful shots of JonBenet hiding behind the tree. The way that I saw that wasn't Little House on the Prairie. It was more, felt a bit like Little Red Riding Hood. That's the way I saw it. But all done in a very sort of fairy tale way. Then he said he got tired quicker than JonBenet did. So the photographer became sort of quite weary of the volume of work that he was doing on this one particular day, just shooting this little girl, 6 years old. Then he says at the Wilson White Fence Farm in Lakewood, which has a gazebo and carousel horses, JonBenet played peekaboo. And so she was enjoying herself. The wind began to blow, so I made Patsy my assistant. She held the reflector when we did the Little Red Riding Hood photograph. So maybe I've gotten that confused. I'm not quite sure what the Little House on the Prairie dress refers to. But anyway, then he says, I photographed JonBenet in 11 different outfits. He calls her a neat kid. And then a month after the shoot, Patsy ordered $960 worth of hand-retouched prints. That was obviously in the days before Photoshop, right? So those were those photos. And now we're going to go to another photographer called Mark Fix. See if I can get his information here. So we've got a date for this. Oh, so I've found it now. The photo shoot with Randy Simons was on June the 5th. And he said that normally you'd be lucky to get an hour or two from a child that young, so 6-year-old, whereas he got JonBenet to do this for the whole day. And so that just shows you to what extent this is kind of a different scenario, a different family that we're dealing with, and a different child. And you've got to ask yourself, why would JonBenet have been so caught up in this? I think Patsy was she was sort of voyeuristically living her own pageant dreams through her daughter, and I think her daughter reveled in her mother's attention. And I think that happened for a while, but I also think that obsession with the pageantry and with the pageants got a bit too much for even JonBenet. It got to a point where it wasn't really her mother's attention now, it was sort of her mother's obsession. And it's hard for a child of that age to feel enjoy an obsession like that, I think. So a month before that, another photographer, Mark Fix, had been photographing pageant contestants on stage, and I'm now reading from page 259 of Perfect Murder, Perfect Town. And one of the people he photographed was JonBenet. And he talks about JonBenet coming out in a shocking outfit, and that a noticeable murmur went through the room. So there was a very strong sense that the Ramseys felt themselves to be different, I guess is a word one could use, to everybody else. That they were just different people compared to a lot of the people around them. Another word that comes to mind is exceptional, and that they wanted to show that they were exceptional, right? They wanted to show not just their individuality, but that they were, I don't know if it's trying to show that you're better than somebody, but that you're trying to, excel. And you're going to see now how JonBenet managed to win a lot of her pageants. The Mark Fix describes the outfit looking a bit like an ostrich. Someone called it a Ziegfeld costume. A lot more expensive and elaborate than anyone else's. So a lot more money, time, effort and expense was going into JonBenet's pageantry compared to everyone else. That's something just to emphasize, is the pageantry, even in terms of pageantry, was excessive. In terms of, dressing JonBenet up and taking the photos and all of that kind of thing. I think that's important to emphasize, is that even the pageantry in terms of the pageants was excessive. So Mark Fix says it was more elaborate than anyone else's, and you could see it was custom tailored for her. And I really like his description here. He says, the way that JonBenet was dressed was like showing up in a tuxedo when everyone else is wearing sandals and shirts. And so obviously in a pageant scenario like that, when you overdo things, when you over-deliver to that extent, it's going to kind of be embarrassing not to give someone who's put so much expense, effort and kind of dedication into their little thing. It's going to be kind of awkward not to make them the winner. And what is interesting is that even Patsy realized she'd overdone it, that it was a little bit over the top, this particular outfit. And she ended up feeling shocked, although who knows whether she was shocked by everyone else's reaction or I'm not quite sure what it was. But there's a very interesting photo of Patsy dressed up in the same way. And so Mark Fix says that JonBenet never wore this outfit ever again. Hey, Timmy. Timmy wants to go for a walk. But we're actually going to a barbecue just now, so that's why he needs to be a bit patient. Timmy. He says not even in the national pageant that I photographed 2 months later. So this was a bit of a setback, overdoing the pageantry. Then he says in July at the national finals, JonBenet's costumes were less frilly. They were still on the cutting edge, but Patsy had changed them to fit the pageant system. And I think that's quite interesting, is that you have this idea that everything was done perfectly. Well, even Patsy had to learn to moderate what she was doing to a level that was sort of appropriate for the pageantry. Does that make sense? And I do think you've got to consider at least the possibility that if the crime wasn't perpetrated by an intruder, then you've kind of also got to think about that, just that idea, just kind of in a hypothetical way, in a speculative way, in a kind of experimental way, to say, isn't that also a case of where you are potentially applying a level of pageantry to a crime scene, and now you've got to try and think, okay, what is the appropriate amount? And of course, if you've never done it before, you're not really going to know that, are you? I'm just saying in terms of a child pageant, it was a similar thing of learning what was appropriate, right? Anyway, then he says they'd been changed to fit the pageant system, JonBenet's clothing, and then her singing and dancing routine had also improved. And Mark Fix describes her as really cooking. He says, I don't know how to describe it. She wanted to win. She was going to win. It showed all the way through. So he's just saying that this confidence, there was this kind of just innate confidence, which I think came from her mother's assertiveness, her mother's conviction. And we all know very well what kind of person Patsy was on television in her interviews, just a very assertive woman, a kind of a no-nonsense woman. And she had instilled that belief, that attitude, that chutzpah into her daughter. Then he says, the photograph I shot of her wearing a crown was just a simple runway photograph. And I think that is the silver crown when she's sort of wearing a white outfit. That appeared on People magazine. I think it's that, I could be wrong. But that I would say is possibly the most iconic photo of all. So where Randy Simons took quite a few really beautiful photos, I think the most iconic photo of JonBenet was this one, where you sort of think of her as this kind of bona fide American princess, right? And he also talks about it appearing on the cover of People magazine. And Mark Fix just says, she just walked up, struck a pose, and that was it. It was, although there was this photo was so important in the story, it was actually not a big deal to photograph. It was just a moment, and then it was gone. For those interested, I've just started uploading the Craven Silence audiobook on Patreon. It's on the $5 tier. For those interested in the Watts case, there's been a lot of brouhaha and sort of fanfare and controversy about a particular book. Meanwhile, my book has actually come out, Silver Fox Post-Truth. It is the third book in the Silver Fox trilogy. It is the final book in a 12-book saga on the Watts case, and it is available on Amazon Kindle. It's available on Patreon as an audiobook on the $10 tier, and it is going to be available in a couple of days in paperback. It's my 100th book, so I'm quite proud about it, and I'm quite relieved that it is done. It was quite a lot more difficult than I anticipated, but the last book in a series like that, you do need to work harder to find fresh information and fresh impetus for a story that we sort of all feel that we know quite well. And I was looking for things that we didn't know, or that we did know and had either forgotten or had forgotten the relevance of. And so I do think I delivered on what I was trying to tell in the story. I also didn't realize that Post-Truth would be as emblematic as it is of where we are right now, not only in the post-truth of the Watts case, but just this post-truth phase that society is in. And I think there are some lessons to learn from the Watts case in terms of that, in terms of how we as a society find ourselves kind of developing a post-truth. And there's even a post-truth of the JonBenet Ramsey case. It's how what we knew in the beginning changes into something else, which isn't necessarily true. If you haven't subscribed yet to the channel, please do like, share, leave a comment. Wherever you are in the world, as Christmas approaches, please stay safe, take care of yourselves, and I will see you guys next time.